Hi, Mage fans. This is your host, Terry Robinson, with Mage the Podcast. And before we get to today's show, DriveThruRPG is having a sale now, which includes 25% off of almost everything that White Wolf publishes. Discord member Forager has made a tool where you drop a DriveThruRPG link into it, and it formats it to take the Mage the Podcast affiliate code. Whenever you use that, we get about 5%, and it helps to keep the lights on. You can go to it at bit.ly/mtpbooks to use it. If you make a purchase this way, shoot me a message in Discord and I'll give you a shout out or make a random fact about you, which likely isn't true, whichever you prefer. For instance, thank you to Charles Siegel, who won the silver medal in the modern pentathlon at the 1992 Summer Olympics as part of the Andorran delegation. Also, thanks to Discord user Ennot or Inknot for supporting us in between bouts of training to fight the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. While I'm at it, I'd also like to thank our executive producers for helping to make this show possible, and they are Anders, Andrew K, Andrew E, Brendan, Bryce Perry, Chris P, Chris Zach, Ira Grace, Jenna F, Justin, John Magnuson, Michael Parker, and Richard Bat Brewster, as well as William. Bet you didn't know this, but Richard Bat Brewster is actually 1127th in line to become the British monarch, and is only 439 falconry accidents, 399 fox hunting tragedies, and 288 fatal badminton injuries away from the crown. Today's episode is a two-parter with friend of the show, Kris Newton of the MegaDumbCast. We first talk about things to steal from the Palladium RPG beyond the supernatural, which he's been covering on his show for the last year, and then talk about how we'd make an Archmage computer dating sim. This both goes through every Archmage and Archmaster in Mage continuity for certain definitions of Archmaster, and then we have a tongue-in-cheek discussion on what dating each of them would be like. This includes Medea, who committed Felicide, and Vormus, Grand Harvester of Souls. So if you're not a fan of dark humor, maybe skip that part of the interview. This also includes what sexy time with an Archmaster could be like, and maybe you don't want your kids to listen to this one. If that's not your cup of tea, we'll be back to doing book reviews next week. And with that, on with the show. Hi, Mage fans. This is your host, Terry Robinson, with Mage the Podcast, and our special guest today to discuss two amazing things is returning guest, raconteur, and world-class podcaster of the MegaDumbCast, Kris Newton. Kris, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm going to go with fine with the question mark at the end. So about a week ago, I went through my first raft of let's see how many kitchen ingredients I can get rid of at one time, and I created this loaf of bread. Now, mind you, I am a baker by constitution. I am 85% refined white flour and 20% water, and bread is not new to me, but I'm like, hey, I'm going to use up what remains of this oat flour, and I produced this loaf, and little did I realize the oat flour I'd used had expired and was slightly rancid.
Ugh.
Yeah. And that was one of those things where I don't normally test the flour beforehand, but I had a slice when I was done, and I'm like, this has a certain funk to it that I would not wish upon my enemies. So I put this loaf on the roof of my house. I live in a major city that shall remain undisclosed, Philadelphia. And on the top of my row home, I put this loaf out, and every day I took a picture of this loaf. And for the first 6 days, it was completely untouched by wildlife. And when I moved to the city, one of the interesting things I saw was these birds that I couldn't identify that turned out to just be incredibly fat house sparrows. They were so fat off of the succulence and milk and honey of the city that I couldn't actually identify them. And not even they would touch it. But recently, a rainstorm had come through the area, and I'm like, oh my God, I am going to have to clear what is going to look like a massacred Pillsbury Doughboy off of my roof. Otherwise, something's going to happen. This brick is going to gain sentience. I was initially worried it would blow off and strike a child walking by. Mm-hmm. But now that it's been softened, feasting, I went up there. There were no less than 2 different species of birds and a squirrel. There were so much that the birds and the squirrels had a temporary truce to gorge themselves on this loaf. And because we live in a time of plague, that was my entertainment for the week.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a journey I don't know if you were expecting, but you're my human contact for the day, so I apologize in advance.
You know, I was not expecting that, but it was delightful. What I'd like to do, with your permission, is steal that story. And from now on, when anyone asks me how I'm doing, I'm going to do that story. But I'm going to start maybe just 1 minute in to start on the roof. So there's no context.
That's entirely fine. Do you have, I know you are a recent father, or at least within the last 24 calendar months are a father. Do you have a parenting story I can steal in a similar manner?
I've lost all perspective, so everything is the most important thing in the world. You know, everything she does is beautiful, every day is magic, but the first thing that occurs to me is she has a shirt that has pineapples on it, and that's wonderful. That's not a story, that's
So that is a story that involves your child, not so much like revolves around your child. So like you have a very tiny ambulatory mannequin. So is that essentially what you're celebrating here, or do you just like pineapples that much?
It's because she's wearing them that I think it's really adorable. And she likes pineapples also. She likes fruits. And so she can identify them. Sometimes she'll point to bananas and say, nanana, because she's learning to talk. And she now knows how to say bye-bye. So she likes to say bye-bye to things and then throw them like over her baby gate or like down into like off the side of a bed or something like that. The moral of the story is you become boring when you have a child.
I could still run with that. I could be like, hey, make up a name for a child and be like, yeah, they said Anana for the first time. And the person will be like, oh, so you have a kid? I didn't realize. It'd be like, no, this is someone else's baby. I just try and keep tabs. I try and keep tabs on my future competition. That's good to know. But in terms of output, the rest of society may be more interested in. Wow, that sounded awfully post-consumerist. You do something called the MegaDumbCast. What is that?
MegaDumbCast is a daily podcast. It is every day one page of a Palladium role-playing game. Palladium is a role-playing game company that is still going today, but is from back in the 80s. And they produced some famously janky rules, some famously imaginative books. I grew up with them, and so I enjoy kind of picking them apart. So every day I pick another page, I go in consecutive order all the way through the book, and I'll tell you each day what is the dumbest thing on this page of this book. And yeah, that's the basic premise. And I'm on like season 3 now, so I'm on my 3rd Palladium book.
You did a series of episodes on what Street Fighter characters you think would and would not get along well, hideous stereotypes from around the world, which were done by people of those nation states, which I certainly appreciated. What book are you discussing this season, and kind of what is its contrivance?
This season is about Beyond the Supernatural, which is the 2nd edition of a game that Palladium published. And the way this worked is they published Beyond the Supernatural 1st edition in like 1989 or thereabout, right before like the big like vampire hit in role-playing games and like goth culture got big, and we had, you know, Buffy and the X-Files and stuff like horror and all that stuff. It's a genre, vague genre that I call trenchcoat horror on the show. That all hit, it came, it went, and then like 1 year later, they finally published Beyond the Supernatural 2nd edition, which was an attempt to sort of like cash in just a little bit late on that whole wave. And so it's a game that has psychics, theoretically includes magic, although, you know, no spoilers. Listen to MegaDumbCast, you'll find out. It contains all kinds of paranormal stuff, monsters and all that. So it's sort of like a mix of, you know, like a World of Darkness aesthetic with the kind of plots you might find on Buffy or X-Files. And you play psychics and you try to navigate your way through this world. And but you do it all with the same Palladium rules that you use for superhero role-playing or post-apocalyptic role-playing. And it's a real mess.
One of the things that seemed interesting about these, looking through the reviews and your commentary and the Rifter magazine, was it is what happens if someone were to write an RPG book and remove the backspace and arrow keys from their keyboard. You are only allowed to go forward into that dark night. Like once a rule has been transcribed, it is law. You can put future modifications on that, which is particularly punishing for people who haven't read the entirety of the text and may not know that an exception exists to a rule. So it's one of those games that it's perfectly possible to play it wrong because you didn't read a repetition of the rule that is included in the description of a character class no one in your group is actually playing but is mechanically identical otherwise. In going through this trenchcoat horror, is there anything from it where you go, oh man, I could actually steal this and shove it into the world of darkness?
Yeah, you know, I think that there's a fair bit of it, particularly the psychic character classes in Beyond the Supernatural. They are not uniformly good ideas, but there is some interest there, sometimes on purpose. Like the Nega Psychic is a brilliant idea. It's like, how do you implement Dana Scully in a game where it's right in your face? Like the vampire's coming at you. There's nothing mysterious about it. And so the Nega Psychic is a psychic who is sort of subconsciously devoted their psychic power to suppressing the supernatural around them. So they are less likely to encounter ghosts and things. Powers that normally are reliable fizzle around them, so they don't see them happen. It's a mechanical way. It's a character class devoted to playing the skeptic in a very unlikely scenario, which I think is brilliant. Then there are character classes like the physical psychic, which is like, they sort of had the idea to do like a Dalsim style yoga master. And they also had the idea to do like, what if we just want like a fighter for this game who uses their psychic powers to throw shit at people? Or what if we wanted like a psychic sports guy who loves to play sports? and they just kind of did all those ideas at once in one class. That's another example where like it's a terrible idea, poorly implemented, but the result is I would like to play this character in Mage, or I would like to play this character as like a weird supernatural hunter, a weird member of the Inquisition who has this combination of like supernatural mind over matter powers along with this kind of like Jack Burton, like all-American swagger. It's weird. You have to develop a taste for it. But if you just listen to my like every episode of my daily podcast, you'll understand what I mean.
Yeah. And an interesting thing regarding the Negapsychic is you are so skeptical that you force doubt on others. The closest we have seemingly in Old World of Darkness is the idea of true faith, that someone believes in something so much it interferes with other powers' ability to meddle with them in the reality. But there is no such contrivance given to the Negapsychic. This is the equivalent of like you running into Dracula and you being like, you're not actually a vampire. And narratively, Dracula having that moment where Dracula goes, maybe I'm not. Maybe I am just a charlatan. And the power fails. And I think that is the true genius of the Negapsychic. I think the other thing that the system has that is very stealable is the proximity equals power setup. Is that something you could describe briefly?
Yes, it's a great idea that was somewhat undermined by some subsidiary rules, but the basic idea is gold, which is essentially your psychic powers are fueled by potential psychic energy. Unlike in other Palladium games, in Beyond the Supernatural, you have a pretty small base amount of potential psychic energy, but it grows when you're in contact with the supernatural, and it grows in accordance with your proximity and with the magnitude of the supernatural influence. So if you're looking for a piddly little ghost or gremlin, you get like double your normal number of points. If you are face to face with an evil god, then you get like 10 times your normal amount of points. Your normal like walking around amount of PPE is not enough to do much. So it creates a situation where it makes it a little more plausible that you have a world where people don't believe in the supernatural, because until you're actually face to face with supernatural evil, you can do little tricks, but not enough to really settle the matter in people's minds. So it's only when you're like on the investigation that you do the big impressive stuff. And a great thing about that is that you sort of re-up your points when you encounter that evil. And so it allows for a situation where whatever the GM wants to spring on you, you sort of get a little re-up of your resources, which is really useful for all kinds of subtle structural reasons about how you put a plot together. So in both like the sweep of the setting and in the nitty-gritty of story construction, in like an investigative story, it's a very good idea.
It's pretty neat. I think you could almost steal something similar from Mage in that you could have a rule that instead of having the difficulty of magic adjust by the setting, the maximum power level of your magic could vary by setting. So you could have something where like, hey, you can't use any effects above 2 dots if people are watching, or 3 dots if people aren't watching, and 4 dots if you're in a sanctum, or 5 dots if you're out in the world of the supernatural. It doesn't quite scale perfectly, but it's another way of thinking about it, that the supernatural begets supernatural. And apparently this is a world where 175% of homicides in the United States are caused by demons. Maybe being able to swing for the fences isn't all that rare. But it's your third season has been an absolutely great listen. You've still got more. It is glorious evergreen content. It is a great escape from whatever you are currently dealing with. This episode may not go out for months, so I have no idea if this is timely coronavirus content or not. But regardless, it is there. And as a listener, it is a wonderful time. So thank you for producing that. But the question we have before us today is, there's frequently rumors that M5, the 5th edition of Mage the Ascension, won't happen because there's no good game tie-in for it. So Vampire is getting an action RPG. There was already the Bloodlines game, and they're going to do a Bloodlines 2, and the company that owns it only wants to do something with a media tie. And Werewolf is also getting a first-person shooter, or third-person shooter, or third-person eviscerate people with your claws or games. What about Mage? And people say, you could never do a Mage game or something like that. And I think that is false, because when I think Mage and I think video game genres, I think dating sim. And when I think awkward combinations of characters forced to get together due to a setting contrivance and wit that can be born on that, I think of Kris Newton. So Kris is going to be our guide through how we could do a Mage the Ascension Archmaster dating sim. So before we get started, some definitions. What is an Archmaster? This is something that has changed quite a bit over time.
Now, I want to make clear. So as a rules term, we're talking about Archmages, correct?
Archmage, Archmaster is kind of used interchangeably.
Okay. My understanding was that Archmaster was typically used for technocrats.
It's one of those things where at an arbitrary point they added that in and then refused to follow through on it.
I've never encountered anything like that in an RPG before.
Yes.
But I'll roll with it.
Yeah. This term has gone through a couple of different definitions. In first edition, a Archmage had mastery of several spheres, usually 5 or more spheres at 5 dots. So you've got references throughout 1E of all the Archmages that are running the various, that are primuses or heads of the primi, the heads of the various traditions. In 2E and revised, we get the definition that an Archmaster or an Archmage has 6 or more dots in a sphere. Initially, you had the standard 5 dots, and if a 6 dot was included, it was strictly narrative. So Porthos Fitzempress and Vormos, Grand Harvester of Souls, are in like the 3rd book ever produced for Mage, the Book of Chantries, and they have a 6 dot, and they're not even defined, because it's just supposed to be like, it is the Mage version of these guys go to 11. And then at the end of 2nd edition, we get 2 books. One is Horizon Stronghold of Hope, which defines the 6 dot, and one is Masters of the Art, which defines dots 6 through 9. So that definition has moved over time. In M20, we don't really have a formal definition. Porthos Fitzempress was always referred to as an Archmaster, but Porthos meets all possible definitions, and we will see as time goes on what that converges to. It is listed as someone who has mastery of the spheres, reflecting lifetimes of practice. Now, let's not confuse what a Archmage or Archmaster is with 2 other things. One is an exemplar. This is a person who is like, I'm going all in, balls to the wall, 1 sphere. This is my John. I want to merge with the cosmos in this particular way. They're the ones who is like, okay, I've got 1 dot and 3 spheres, but literally 9 dots in entropy. And that person is just like all the entropy all the time. And they're the creepy person at a dinner party who, no matter what topic you bring up, they always bring it back to the Civil War. And another term that is useful is an oracle, which is someone who has stopped just short of Ascension. And we never really get systems for that. In today's discussions, we are going to exclude 2 at least of these Archmages. One is Alan Turing. I don't know about you, Kris, but someone who ultimately wound up committing suicide after being persecuted by the state for being a homosexual, I don't feel comfortable speculating about their dating life. That feels like a super tender topic, and I'm gonna steer clear of that. The other one is Michael Faraday, because it feels super weird to write historical fiction about Michael Faraday. So
I object to the idea that the rest of this isn't super weird, but other than that, I am in total agreement.
There is a Rubicon of weirdness that I do not wish to cross. We are using kind of the 2E definition where you got 6 dots. Just for those keeping track at home, we are including the 6 characters that are in the system indicated as having a 6 dot. Al-Aswad, the Unnamed, which is odd because the Unnamed has a name. Ishak ibn Thoth, Medea, Michael Scott, Porthos Fitzempress, and Vormos, Grand Harvester of Souls. In addition to that, there are other characters that are heavily implied as being Archmages and are addressed as such, or have some sort of transcendent power that is predicted later. This is a fuzzy category. This is one of those cases where if we included everyone that could possibly fit, this would be a very long episode, and Kris has a baby to raise. And that includes Dante, Mariana of Balador, and Senex. And I have my personal favorites. So let's just, let me just alphabetize these then, and we can go through it. So the first Archmage we get is Al-Aswad, the Unnamed. So Al-Aswad is a character that is introduced in the original Book of Madness and is one of the Aswadim, which named after himself, kind of a big ego, and is supposedly the first entity to ever pledge service to the entities of the outer darkness, the things that lurk beyond reality that are trying to destroy everyone. And there he is presented kind of as a crazy guy with super dark skin who's very charming and may be able to make a fortune out of ASMR videos based on how he talks, and comes back in the book Ascension, the last book notionally in the Mage continuum before being restarted under CCP, where in one of the scenarios, he simply takes over all of creation. And he returns, the 10th seat is actually his. He's like, bitches, you couldn't figure it out. Now I'm going to rule creation and I'm going to murderate all of you. By the way, I destroyed your tree and all the traditions as well. He strikes me as a very angry character, plays a long game, which I appreciate, which could be super useful in dating. What were your thoughts about the Unnamed one?
I have to be honest with you and say that I'm not too interested in dating somebody who wants to end creation. It's hard to get behind for a number of reasons. The thing I noted, and I kind of dug into the spheres here, just to sort of get a sense of, because, the unnamed, unknowable enemy of all things, it's like, okay, but like, who are you as a person? And what I found is that his entropy score is very high. And that really put me off of him because it made me think, like, what's the relationship like? Because it ends in the destruction of creation. So it's got to be good in the middle, right? Mm-hmm. Here's the thing. A normal person, I feel, in a relationship, they can be stultifyingly boring in a relationship and like very predictable and everything is just like clockwork and has to be planned. Or on the other end of the spectrum, you can have somebody who is like totally unreliable, completely chaotic. I sort of feel like a transcendent master of entropy is both of those things, and that is the worst possible scenario. Like, when I think of someone who has like the epitome of entropy, that sounds like a miserable existence, totally locked into fate, totally in a sense like on these tracks, and yet every plan you make is just like at any moment can just like dissolve into its atomic parts. It sounds just awful. I understand that he's hot, but I need matter to cohere.
Yeah, and that seems certainly problematic. The things that leapt out at me are, one, probably the sense of entitlement that's going to come with it. This character has a destiny of 10. That, coupled with the fact that their demeanor is tyrant or visionary, that really seems someone who's really into sniffing their own farts. Also, Dream 10, I don't care how high your dream score is. I don't want to hear about your dreams. And I think that would be a real deal killer for me. Also, Mastery of Time is only at a 5 compared to the other sphere. Probably runs late a little bit. I mean, it's taken him 20,000 years to take over creation. His initial plan was probably for it to be much shorter than that. So I don't know if I want to have to put up with that. And the appearance 8/0, I understand the /0 part. You should really be into someone for their personality, but at the end of the day, you kind of want a little bit of eye candy, especially if they're going to be the God King, like hoarding over the smoldered ruin of creation. Like, I want something that's nice to look at, and that /0 has big concerns for me. Do you have any thoughts about maybe who the unnamed one, Devourer of Reality, would actually work out well with?
I don't think anybody fits in with the unnamed. As I thought about this as a dating sim, I see the unnamed more as like the bad ending. I think this is like, if you play through Final Fantasy VII and you're a real dickhead to all the women on the team, then you go on a date with Barrett to the Golden Saucer, kind of as a punishment, like, no offense to Barrett. And I feel that way about the unnamed. I think that if you're a mage who makes all the wrong choices, which, known to happen with mages, seems to be canonically. Of hubris.
Yeah.
Then I think at the end, the bad ending of the dating sim is, good for you. The only person in creation who is into you wants to end creation. So reconsider your choices. Try again next time. So I think the unnamed is more so than a straight up love interest. I think he is like the bad ending of this dating sim.
Yeah. Alternatively, someone who is incredibly shallow. The only other thing that really came to mind is someone who is equally insufferable. So people who are all about ultra marathoning, like, I look at his attributes, 10/20 stamina. This is someone you can take on a long run, and he's got that going for him. And that's there's someone for everyone. Strength 15. Someone who's super into CrossFit, I could really see looking at Al Aswad and being like, I want to be that douchebag someday. So I think we've got that going for it. And it's very simple. Like, also specifically indicates doesn't have any backgrounds that have occurred within the past few thousand years. This is a person that you're going to have to explain how to use the TiVo. So maybe like one of those paleo keto people who enjoys CrossFit and survivalist hobbies, which is also going to be useful because, again, when they destroy all of creation and upend life as we know it, the ability to run long distances to scrape out a meager existence may prove to be useful. But I really like your thought and the idea that you put into this. This is certainly a bad ending character. Moving on to the next one alphabetically, we have Dante. Now, Dante is the character that is on the front of all the Mage books, a very striking character, one of the few characters that we actually get some information about their dating life, or at least who they've hooked up with. We get the character Nile in Horizon Stronghold of Hope, which I remember reading it initially, and Dante's like 27 or something like that. I'm like, 27? That's so old. And now that I'm like 36, I'm like, this whippersnapper running around reality. And Dante's partner, friend, co-explorer of reality, Nile, who is 22, which to me, now my 36-year-old man response is like, you're robbing the cradle. And also, I think in the biblical term, it was came to know Mariana of Balador. So good to know that he can keep up with the pros. Noted as being one of the few characters who was born awakened, so that's not something we really get much in the rest of Mage. Started a group called the Lab Rats, was originally a progenitor experiment, escaped from that, and is also probably the only Oracle we get information of. Guy with kind of a chip on his shoulders, really trying to destroy the technocracy, who ultimately caused the death of his mother. He came out the other end of it, was a tradition master in 2E. By the time that we get to the end of Revised, is probably an Oracle, so is more than a human, is kind of less than completely merged with all of creation. What were your thoughts on Dante?
I think this is a much better prospect than the unnamed. Quite frankly, he has a name and a cool name. I mean, that's the thing about Dante, is that, like, sometimes it can be a little bit frustrating when you've got this, dare I say, Mary Sue type character dominating certain parts of in-game reality. But the nice thing about the dating sim setup is now that's aspirational, like as a relationship goal. That's like, let me get in on this. You know, let me be the +1 to the guy who clearly is designed to kind of like run this story, the most important person in the world in a weird way. That, to me, that's Dante, and he's got everything. Like, what's not to like? He's like a good-looking guy, super smart. He likes kids. I mean, he helps kids. He's modern, which again, after reading about all these old men from old-timey times, I would appreciate somebody who like knows my references, like understands what's going on in the world around me. And, you know, I'd say the only drawback could also be a benefit in that, you know, he's hard to get. I mean, he's an important guy. So I feel like it's a real uphill battle to get his attention. Then once you're there, you're going to feel special. I mean, if you're dating Dante, you're almost like a protagonist at that point.
It's one of those things where you're so important. You're the Eva Perón to his, I don't remember Eva Perón's husband name, so I should probably just cut that out. Yeah, exactly. Good point. You could rise to that level. The thing that struck me about it was this was the archetype of the hot teacher. But not like creepy hot high school teacher, but maybe like hot early PhD teacher who is not necessarily at a research university and wants to spread the wealth around, so they still teach 2 classes and people super compete to do it, to be into it, and people just melt when the professor looks at you and goes, that's a good point. And like, that's one of those things where if there's like a little stat bar at the bottom that keeps track of like how into you the other character is and maybe how infatuated you are with that, like you get a good point, and that like makes an audible ding noise and advances some way. I don't actually know how dating sims work. I don't know how dating works. My current girlfriend basically seized me in a daring midnight raid off of OkCupid, and it has been nothing but joy ever since. So I'm really a bad resource on that. The other thing, the one downside I see is I could really see this being a 2-timing character. Anyone who has this much mastery of correspondence, who can literally be in multiple places at once, I would be worried about never quite getting their attention. So if I am a person who needs someone to be super into me, I don't know if this is who I go for.
He's very against the technocracy. So from the perspective of your dating sim, I sort of see this as a character who there's a fork at some point where you got to make a decision about whether to really be like stridently anti-technocracy or like keep your dating pool open. And I think that you have to take that fork away from the technocracy to get Dante. That's the way that I would structure it. So I think it's foreclosing other options. Because as you say, I mean, here's a guy who's got a ton of perspective. He's got a ton of correspondence. You know, is he seeing other people? Look, he's seeing everybody. He's seeing everyone. So maybe he's comfortable with you doing that too, right? Like we can have an open relationship. Like, look, it's all reality is just one point, baby. So I think that if he were to find you sleeping with the enemy, then you could have a problem. So that's like, I think it depends on like how sexy do you find the technocracy? How interested in them are you? Because you may have to make a choice. But, you know, other than that, he's just obviously a great catch. Let me take this moment of your podcast to say something I was going to say on my podcast and that I wasn't able to fit it in an episode.
Please do.
Speaking of hot teachers, Indiana Jones is sexiest in teacher mode, not in adventurer mode. I just want to go on the record.
Yeah. Anyone can be a sexy adventurer, but not everyone can be that brimming with confidence, stacked, informed professor at the same time. So it's one of those things where you can either do well in something that is easy or do well in something that is hard. And I think the latter is always going to be more impressive. And yeah, the indie commentary really hits that, I think, on the head. The next one is, this is a bit of a sleeper, I think, is Ishak ibn Thoth. Ishak is the head of the Order of Hermes in Revised and is the only real Archmaster that we get in Revised. Member of House Quasitor, which are the judges of the group, spent his youth ping-ponging around the world. His parents were both mages, which I don't know how much emotional baggage that's going to give, but there's going to be some there. Responsible for a poorly thought-out bid to try and destroy House Tremere. Lettered Wizard's March about that. Kind of learned his lesson. Is now taking a back seat. Is now trying to figure out what he's going to do with his life, and who knows, maybe that includes dating. Middling statistics, except for very academically inclined, and a 6 dot in spirit. So who knows when that's going to come up. You haven't come to a conclusion on what you think about the Rogue Council yet, and you're one of the few Archmages that is still in existence on Earth.
He is one of my favorites. I mean, maybe it doesn't speak well of me, I don't know, but some of these people are like a little intimidating. It's a little too high flown for me. I'm very interested in an abstract way in all this big intellectual paradigm stuff. But when it comes to a relationship, I feel like I want somebody who's a little bit more grounded. You know, I don't want to be constantly in the shadow of like their capital letter deep thoughts. And I feel like you get both with Ishak, because what I really like about him is how in his backstory, like he is very driven, very smart, but like he kind of learned a lesson about paying more attention to his family, about the people in his life. And I like that he wants that balanced approach. Also, the Spirit 6, which to me is, I don't want to say it's unexpected, but it's like, it's an interesting choice for a Hermetic. And I think it's a really good sign, because I actually looked it up in Masters of the Arts, and it says that it has like Awaken Ephemera. It's an effect where it's like an animistic world where you can, you know, interact with like the little spirits in everything. And that just to me lends itself to a considerate person, like a worldview where you are respecting everything, you know, very much the opposite of what you would expect from a Hermetic, maybe, like from my biased point of view. You see people as people. You see kind of everything as people. And I really like that. He seems like a nice, sweet guy. And he seems like he's a good looking guy. Just a cool dude. I actually have written down here, quote, just a cool dude.
Yeah, appearance for Slick as Hell is not something... Now, Slick as Hell is literally what the character sheet says as a specialty in appearance, and that's something you don't run into every day. Character strikes me as a real good listener. So I think if someone maybe has had another relationship where maybe they have dated another Archmaster who was really wound up in what they were doing with the world, like, no, honey, I can't come help. I need to destroy the tenets of reality. Or, no, I can't help with the dishes. I'm trying to destroy the technocracy. Or I'm trying to create the Philosopher's Stone. This seems like a nice reprieve from that. I'm not going to say I would want to use Ishak as a rebound, but maybe it's probably going to be a big change of pace for anyone who's dated a different kind of Archmaster. The only concerns I have is I really feel like this is a character that would be quietly judging me a lot. Again, very, very high base attributes, has been humbled before, but what really jumps out at me, resonance, static, 5 points, perfecting. I don't know if I could deal with that in some cases. This is also a person where I feel like I could also be maybe always leaving them a bit short, but they have 5 dots in subterfuge and 5 points in manipulation. Even if they were judging me, I would probably never notice. So do you see any downsides for going all in on Ibn Thoth?
I'm into it, honestly. I think your point about the rebound is really a good one. If you should enter a relationship with one of these people, like say Dante, God forbid, right? You get to the top of the mountain and then Dante decides, like, look, we're done. There's not too many people you can go to that wouldn't seem like unequivocally a huge step down. But I think if you go to Ishak, it's like he's a very powerful, like high status person who has a different worldview of like, let's respect young mages. Let's give them some space. Let's let them see what they can do. Let's facilitate this being their moment. And I appreciate about his resonances too. He's got perfecting, but he's also got catalyzing, which to me, what that suggests is here's somebody who's very dedicated to getting it right, but he also wants to do that in a way where he's bringing in other people's voices and talents in an additive way. He seems like he'd be a really good editor, you know, in the sense that he's not there to like put people down and take people off the project and like get his exact vision. I think he's looking for things that he likes and respects and can work with and putting them together in ways that gets the whole unit closer to doing the job it needs to do, which is like, I sound like you know, I'm here for like Ishak for president of the council, but like, he seems like a really cool dude, and I can deal with that in a relationship too, because honestly, who couldn't use some perfecting as long as it's like in a nice way, in a way that's respectful of everyone's voice in the relationship.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where also sounds like a great neighbor, head of a homeowners association, awesome there. Again, maybe not quite the Dante in terms of sexy teacher, but still up there for a certain type, especially the whatever the male equivalent of a cougar is. I could see that as being a mooger, as it were. Is there a male term for a cougar? My other thought, while we're trying to figure out the male version of a cougar, is I see this as being a character that is super frustrating to the online community, like players who are trying to be like, hey, I played through the game once, I want to try and get all the Archmasters. And they think initially, oh man, I need to come up with a character build that can really let me hit Eshock directly. But it turns out the only way to get Eshock is kind of as that rebound, is to swing for the fences and miss, and then realize there's other things that you could go for in other forms of happiness. And I could see that as being both a lesson in-game and out-of-game, which is ultimately what we want out of a Mage game. Also that and cool graphics. So was your research able to find a male version of a cougar?
First result is Manther. But I think in a World of Darkness context, there's a level of confusion. There's a moment where you think, oh shit, Manthers, they're on to me.
Oh shit, yeah. The next one, the first speed bump in Operation Sausage Fest, is Mariana of Balador, several hundred-year-old former Primus of the Cult of Ecstasy, has had friendly relationships with most members of the council, likely a Archmaster of Time, which runs Balador Pleasure Dome, which is something that Adam and I went through in our review of Book of Worlds, which, fascinating to me, it is this massive umbral realm dedicated to hedonism and pleasure. But there are two oddities. One, maximum capacity, 300 people. I don't know about you, but that's an uncomfortably low ceiling if I'm going to have the world's largest mage orgy. Two, the thing about it is they specifically say murder sometimes happens, but don't bad touch people, which I understand. Like, we don't want to bad touch people, but like the whole murder sometimes happens, that strikes me as being a bit more than I want out of things. Indicated as being a shape changer, has appeared as several different people throughout time, is kind of indicated may still be out there, may have survived the Avatar Storm, just kind of in another form. There is a back and forth, I think, in Horizon Stronghold of Hope, where Mariana and Dante kind of wink at each other and have like, we may have come to know each other on several dimensions simultaneously. And again, this is why you don't want to spend too much time with people who have the ability to co-locate. What were your thoughts on Mariana?
Pros and cons. She's known as the Queen of Pleasure, so that's a nice thing to put in your profile. I'm interested. She seems not only like sexy and nice, but also responsible. Like, she's held positions of responsibility. Because I mean, like, not to get into my personal background too much, but like, if you're gonna start approaching people on the basis of the crazy sex stuff, then it's like there's a whole life that goes on that facilitates this. Like, if you have an orgy heavy life, then maybe there are other areas that are suffering, right? Nothing against orgies, God knows, but I'm just saying. She seems, however, very responsible. You can count on her. She's going to do an orgy, and then like it's going to end by 3:00 on the dot, and she's going to be at the meeting. She's going to be like sitting on the board. Everything's going to be great. So that's a good relationship. That's everything you want. Also, I was very impressed by her mix of magical talents. Like, I think for a relationship, correspondence, mind, and time, that gives me somebody who is profoundly enlightened about the way people experience things and like the course of a life. She seems like somebody who would have a lot of perspective, which I guess you would have to have if you're trying to like hold down a job while you live in a pleasure dome. She seems like she has a ton of perspective. And, you know, those are great spheres for both managing a life and having a lot of fun. Like, my biggest thing was looking myself straight in the mirror. What do I have to offer the Queen of Pleasure and the ruler of the Pleasure Dome? Maybe you can answer that. What do you think you have? What would you put out there to draw her in?
Oh, easily for me, baking skills. I think it would be very much a hit 'em where they ain't, where it's like, yeah, I understand that you're capable of manifesting dozens of love tentacles and through the power of time, creating a moment of Agam that extends for decades. But you know what? Not a lot of people out there, not a lot of men especially, can make French macaroons from scratch. And I really think that's what I would bring to the front. Be like, hey, there are other senses that you can indulge in. I understand where yours are, but you know what Horizon doesn't really have? You know what the Balador Pleasure Dome doesn't really have? Doesn't have a Starbucks. Doesn't have a... There's no place where you can get petite floors. There's no croissants there. I've looked entirely through the Mage canon. No instances of them having a small French patisserie of any sort. And I really think that's something. And you could have a very direct angle of being like, yeah, I understand that the orgy beyond time is going on right now, but I have these really banging Bavarian soft pretzels. And that's something that you can't get in the Orgy Dome. I would then melt under her withering stare. But you know what? If I had to go on plate, that's the ball I would swing at. I don't know how sports work, so that metaphor may not entirely work. But
they always say that's the trick in baseball. You got to decide which ball to swing at.
which ball to swing at. You miss 100% of the balls that you're not in the game for. Yeah, I think that's what noted baseballer Wayne Gretzky once said. The endless sexual appetites. Maybe we put an end to that. Maybe you play hard to get. That's the only other thing I could think of. Again, though, mastery of time and the fact that I would probably have other, let's say, physiological tells that may indicate that I am maybe not being truthful, that would probably give that away. But I definitely go the French pastry angle. What do you think you'd bring to the table when trying to bring home the Archmistress?
I mean, on a personal level, I think all I have to give is a little bit of self-knowledge. A little, like, I feel like, bring me to the Pleasure Dome because I can't earn my spot there. Mm-hmm. Like, I need you to give me the golden ticket, right? Like, let me into your chocolate factory.
Yeah, we're going to take 200 people that apply. They're just getting in, and you get to be one of those.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, you got a lot of sexy bodies, and you got a lot of delicious treats there, but how many people do you have there who are ambivalent about pleasure, right? That's a perspective. That's a voice.
Oh, interesting. I can see what you're doing.
I have a big swing to take, inspired by film of, I think, great philosophical import, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Mm-hmm. She's a prophet. So here's what I think you do if you want to take a big swing. I think you say, hi, the thing is, as you know, in the future, we're lovers. So do you want to get started? Now, if she looks forward and sees that that's true, then she will get into you in the present, and that makes it true in the future. So
the predestination paradox. Okay.
Exactly.
It's the romantic version. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm picking up what you're putting down. I still think there's a way to do it. Like, oh, this person is interested in the art of prophecy. Maybe I can train them, and maybe that then becomes your in. Or alternatively, this Mariana is so intrigued that you have seen a future that she has not. That if nothing else, I think you get onto the radar. And that's one of those things where you could kind of be maybe like the farm team for the Orgy Dome, where it's one of those things where it's like you're not quite ready for the Orgy Dome, but this person shows promise. The lesser Orgy Domes that maybe we have on the Earth side, maybe you get to start there. You prove to us that you're really an A hitter. Maybe you cut carbs and start focusing on your core a little bit more. And then maybe in a couple of years, you're at the Pleasure Dome. I like that.
Yeah, that's, the story about how, like, if two people are trying out for baseball and everything is exactly the same, but one person has bad form when they run the bases, you're supposed to pick that one because you can coach it away. I think that's the parable that Mariana tells you when you're like, how was it for you? I think to explain like her position on you and your physical attributes.
Oh, that's interesting. So me as a pudgy man, I am more like just a brick of marble that can be sculpted. So there's so much headroom for me that whatever I do bring to the table, that maybe there's something on top of that. I like that. That gives me hope. And we're in a dense section, the M's, of the 9 Archmasters that we're discussing. 3 begin with M, and the second one is the only other lady on the list, at least in most expressions of it, and this is Medea. Now, Medea, the Marauder Oracle, one good name, certainly has earned it. Interesting to have a Marauder whose nature is traditionalist, former Verbena, 6 dot in life, super useful if you're the clumsy type, and wife of Jason and the Argonauts fame. Something happened, she's returned, stars in her eyes, is attended by a group of Black Furies, the lady only or predominantly lady werewolf group, base quiet of 2. So where do you see this one going?
If you're familiar with Medea, then you know exactly where this is going. I mean, I can't recommend. Medea is just, she's, I don't know, since time immemorial, since the misty origins of the mythic age, sometimes she's absolutely, not that she wasn't wronged, but she killed her children. I mean, she killed her kids. And before that, for whatever Jason did to her, she betrayed her family for him. Medea she's a fascinating character. But you do not want any part of her life. Like, she's got an entourage of Black Furies. So even if you get on her good side, they're not going to be into you. I mean, this is not a safe situation, even if Medea likes you. And if she does, like, just wait a minute. Like, you're going to be in life 6. Think of all the horrible mythological shit that she can do to you. Like, she can create mythical creatures. She can give you horrible diseases. She notably can transform you into another form without taking away your human intelligence. this is well precedented mythology.
This really gets I have no mouth yet I must scream territory real fast, which is not a place I really want to be in a dating sim. So yeah, this seems like one of those things where I'm playing the game and wow, this person's really great. Quiet at 2. Everything around me seems slightly inflected to be like Greek myth. And the problem with this, her being a marauder thing, maybe I do think I'm Jason and I'm start building myself up and of, hey, I've got these 2 great kids. What could possibly go wrong? Bam. Then reality sync comes into play. And just to note, we are not presuming in this game that these are specifically heterosexual or homosexual or any other thing of relationships. You're archmages. All these things are practically relative of that at that point. But yeah, Black Fury's not known for having low standards. So I get a real You Go Girl vibe off of the tribe of Black Furies, where it's one of those things where like, oh, while you're with her, it's great, but when you're not with her, like you're worse than dead, which is problematic to me. Like I've run into that in relationships before. Like you need to support me, honey. Sometimes supporting you is telling you you're doing something stupid. And the Life 6 angle is really concerning.
It's tough. And I want to make sure, as you say, like, I don't want to come at this from a sexist angle. It's hard because the character of Medea is such a well-established literary character who fulfills so many of the negative stereotypes of women. So it's hard to like talk about her without falling into that. I want to emphasize Jason is also a dickhead. Like, not to drive by Jason, he's not an archmage, but she is severely wronged. But also, she has reality warping baggage. Like she so can't get over what happened to her that she is literally dragging it into the present around her, despite the fact that like Medea did not get dealt a good hand. Nonetheless, you don't want to get involved with her whole scene. I do need to point out, in her defense, she can apparently be reasoned with, because despite the fact that she's like literally manifesting the energy of mythic Greece around her, her friends did convince her to start wearing what appears to me to be a white t-shirt and black cargo pants instead of Greek clothes, which is like a wonderful thing to compromise on. If you're going to make one compromise, like, okay, cargo pants are cool. Like, fuck it. It's the 90s. All right.
Best case scenario, maybe this is like the hard mode version of it, where there is that ultimate thing where you can help Medea deal with Medea's baggage, that there is a thing that comes out the other side. But yeah, again, you have a lot of literary baggage saying, then that's not going to work out. It's really hard to get over Felicide. Would you be comfortable with Medea as like your bestie? Like, how would you view Medea in maybe some other role, maybe as being your wing person?
In terms of like where I want her in my romantic life, if I'm going to put her out there, she's got to play some position. And so I just have to decide.
Yeah. Got to get them off the bench and onto the ice to play. Yeah. To round the bases in the football. Yeah.
Right. Ice polo. I don't want to do the wing person idea, because what if she starts to get into this person who I'm into? Now somebody's kids are going to die. I don't want to be responsible for that. What I would like to do is maybe like it's dangerous, but if somebody is able to sort of like get away from her, like if she's sort of like in the romantic comedy, she's the person that the love interest is going out with at the beginning of the movie, and then I have to like slowly awaken them to like, yeah, I know, she's so hot and she has this whole sob story, but honestly, your kids are going to die. Like, come on, like get out of there, get out of that relationship. That's a big challenge, but I think I would be satisfied at the end of it that I had managed to pull them out. What is this if not gaslighting, right? Like when you're literally changing someone's reality to be like where you grew up, that's gaslighting. Maybe there's a guy who his name happens to be Jason, and so he's hanging out with Medea and they're together, and he like he's never read Euripides, right? So like, what does he know? He's just some like 22-year-old dumbass. So now I can come in as like the voice of experience, like speaking of hot teacher, and like, hey, let me give me some plays to read. You can see where this is going.
And do you think in this version Medea becomes Mindy or some other milquetoast name, or does that kind of lose the oomph that you would need for that to kind of stand out to an audience?
I think that she has to keep the name Medea for sure. I don't think that's a compromise that she would make. So I don't think it's true to the character, because, if you look at like her look and the company she keeps, people might assume she was somebody who was named something like Mindy and decided to be like goth badass, like an angry goth, and calls herself Medea, but it's actually her real name.
Yeah. The only other angle I can see is they do specifically indicate that Medea does feel sorrow over the death of the children, which worries me partially because that's one of those things where if things go sideways and Medea's quiet score goes up, I could see those kids coming back. And that's going to get real messy real fast, especially when you got access to Life 6. Just putting that one out there. I'm not saying it's a zombie scenario, but I don't want to have to find out. The other one is if you are looking not for a girlfriend, but for a partner in a cause, possibly. If you two are fanatical about a single thing and it doesn't become about romance, it becomes about purity to something. Like, say Medea's a super Bernie bro. or something like that. I could really see that kind of being the angle. Or maybe you're both anarcho-capitalists or something like that, or you're big fans of Noam Chomsky. That's the one case where I could really see this working. Or again, it being the harm mode one, where every dialogue choice, you've got 3 options and 2 of them result in your death. So that's going to be one where you're hitting the save, you're hitting the replay button a lot. But when you get through to the end, you unlock something in Steam and people are like, okay, you were able to successfully date Midia without dying. This is a person I need to respect in the dately arts. So the third of the M's I have is almost the opposite of most of the Archmages we've encountered so far. Michael Scott. But Michael Scott was a British Isles Archmage, sporting a 6-dot in spirit, who was a member of the Order of Hermes, and in an attempt, in a magely fight, there's this paradox explosion that occurs, and suddenly the character finds themselves with Arcane 7. Now, Arcane is one of the coolest backgrounds I think that exists in Mage, where people have difficulty remembering you and recording equipment doesn't work as well as it does normally. And the problem is, once you get past 5 dots, you can't turn it off. And Arcane 7 is at the level where electronic records of you in databases will completely disappear. Mentions of you in a book or a diary will go away. Here it specifically says Michael Scott needs 3 successes on a willpower roll, difficulty 8 to be noticed, and if one of them isn't a 10, his words will eventually be forgotten. I thought it was interesting that they indicate that whenever they have a meeting, they put out 3 chairs, one for one head, one for another head, and one for Michael Scott. So he's kind of like the Elijah of the Alt Covenant, which I thought was an interesting take, but I get it. So not person who has a very heavy footprint in the world. What were your thoughts about Michael Scott? Also, probably about 900 years old, I think.
So Michael Scott, I think it's an interesting angle because the hardest thing is just to make the connection. He's somebody who fades into the background. I sort of see a scenario where he shows up as like an overactive extra in a scene where someone else is in the foreground, like they do in dating sims, you know, where you have like the main character out in the front and then there's like the little background that's not very detailed. And you have to take the initiative to go like click on like who's that weird extra in the background of this scene, and then he sort of becomes available. So it's an interesting challenge, like just noticing him and establishing a connection with him that doesn't immediately vanish would be the hardest part. But then if you can do that, you know, I think he's going to be maybe all in on you because it describes that he, you know, almost went mad from loneliness. You know, he's adapted now, but surely somebody who can stay close to him, who can maintain that relationship, I think he's going to be into it. So, like, I think I can get Michael Scott. The question is, do I want an old, you know, a 900-year-old British man in my life? Is that what I need right now? I'm not impressed with his mastery of spirit. There are tales of the real-life Michael Scott summoning food from other countries with his spirits to feed his guests, which does not impress me. This is not like Ishak, who is, like, very nice and compassionate toward all things. This is like, I have learned to master the spirits so that they can bring me that nice niçoise salad that I like. That sucks. I mean, he seems testy from his quote. He's a cool character to have in the game, but he's more of a novelty. He's more of like when somebody says, oh, who'd you end up with in the ending? You say Michael Scott, and they're like, who? It's like, yeah, I found the secret character. You know, the pudgy old British man, I got him.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some of the upsides. Prime 5 Forces 5. This is a person that I think for very practical reasons could actually be quite useful. So if I were to build a home with this person, I feel like this is a character that may not remember my birthday, but if I made a comment about really wishing that we had a garbage disposal, the garbage disposal would probably materialize, maybe quite literally. I'm not entirely sure. So I think very practical, probably old-fashioned, as you mentioned, that I have my role, this person has this role, and as long as we stick to our knitting, this could work. I also see an option where you need to bring this character, like the rom-com thing that involves time travel, where you have old-timey chivalry, but also you need to bring a character up to date on the norms and mores of dating in the 21st century. I could see that as being a really interesting angle where maybe you find a way to suppress the arcane. You take this person out to dinner for the first time in 6 or 7 centuries, and you have to explain to them, no, this is how a wine menu works. This is the custom of tipping. It's not polite to challenge someone who backs their chair into you with a duel. Sometimes things run late, and this is something called quinoa. And so I think it could be really exciting in that. Like the whole hermetic angle, I think once Scott got on board with trying to get himself up to date, that could be a really fun kind of romp. And then you would get this weird outsider view of things. So as opposed to like in that like, we have to explain Earth customs to this alien or something like that. I think that could be a really fun angle, but I could also see that really ending in Heartbreak, because how much are you going to change an Archmaster? Like that's not an easy ship to turn. So I could see there's probably a really small group of people that would be super into him. But yeah, this is kind of a C- ending or something like that, or you did a weird click, or you're just doing it to get the achievements. It's not really tier 1.
I think I'm exactly on the same page as you. I will say I can contribute a plot for the sort of like the thing you're suggesting, where like you bring him to the modern world and have to introduce him to modern stuff, where you tell him that he, like Michael Scott, is like a known historical figure. His name has survived, and everyone knows him. But then you leave him home alone, and he watches TV and he sees Michael Scott on The Office, and he thinks that's what people think he is, and he becomes crushed with depression that this is his legacy. And then you have to tell him later, like, no, Scott with 2 T's, like, people know the real you. It occurs to me only as I say this that I am also stealing this from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, because that's how Napoleon feels about Napoleons. So there you go.
Not everyone has as graceful a pivot as Rainn Wilson did, going from The Office to Star Trek Discovery. So we're coming into the home stretch. We've covered the first 2/3. Now we're hitting to one that this is going to be hard. This is some heavy hitters. Porthos Fitz Empress. Porthos, head of the Drishti, Primus of Duizitep, often depicted as insane, has some pretty bonkers statistics, was born in 1403 in Breslau, Germany, is 600 years old, may or may not have died during the War for Horizon, depending on which source you consult, is kind of interesting, because to me, they are the mage version of somebody going through, I should save my powder on this, is generally considered to be the mouthpiece of Satyros Filbricato, writer for the line. Also, may or may not have been responsible for the death of his family, or at least unable to stop it. That strikes me as another baggage thing, but also is probably one of the characters we know the most about.
It's a big achievement to get Porthos. Like, he's a huge name. Right, so that's like, it's almost on par with Dante. The trouble I have is for all the effort to get there. Like if you climb the mountain and you get to Dante, there's that smiling face looking back at you. Porthos, like I'm looking through my notes, there's virtually not a good thing about him. Unpredictable, racked with guilt, sometimes randomly treats people like they're his actual kids, which is gross in the context of a relationship. Seems to be brimming with this power that he can barely control. Seems to have accidentally killed people from time to time. Doesn't wash his hair. Extremely eccentric. Apparently, and this is deep mage stuff and I don't know all the details, what I do know is that there was the Great Betrayal, and that apparently he knew about it in some way, but didn't say anything because he had a crush on someone called Eloine. Am I getting that name right?
Member of the first cabal that represented the tradition of the Verbena.
Here's my thing. Her wiki page on the White Wolf wiki doesn't mention him. On his page, it says he had such a crush on her that he basically fucked up the whole world. He's a real creep. If the hair and all that were not a giveaway, he's a real creep. And his 6th dot is in Forces, which is the most boring of the spheres. I don't really see much of an upside here. I'm not too interested in dating Porthos, and if I wanted to, I guess I'd find him when he's walking around in his bathrobe and just try to he's in a good mood. He's in the bathrobe. Let me just jump on this dude and see if he goes for it. So maybe that's the best play, but why?
Yeah, this seems to be like, this is not quite an antagonist, but a complication that you could deal with, that you have this relationship and it's going really great with Eshok or something like that. And you're like, oh, this is great. And then the game gives you indications that Porthos is kind of into you, that you remind him of one of his kids or something like that. And now you have to deal with that, where you have to show enough interest that he doesn't feel scorned and doesn't go crazy and like have goblins tear you up in the dead of night, but not so into him that the person that you're primarily looking for is like, ooh, you're going after Porthos. You're such a power queen, or whatever the Archmage equivalent of a size queen would wind up being. So I see that as being a complication. Maybe if you're super into some things, like you want to have someone to call daddy, that's something you could go for. Again, to each their own, and that I fully understand. The thing that kind of gets me about Porthos is, sometime in the 90s, Porthos has this second wave and exits quiet and is like, hey, we need to reform a whole bunch of stuff. I'm real worried about Porthos being like, yeah, I'm young, I'm hip, I'm into it, I need a relationship, and that going really south real quickly. So this strikes me as maybe in the harder modes of the game, like you could, in your attempt to attract the person of your choice, you could wind up attracting Porthos, and now that's something that you have to deal with. On the plus side, this seems like a character that if you're willing to be a little bit emotionally harmful, you could get a lot out of. Enigma 7, Intelligence 7, these are good things to have around if that's humanly possible. Paradox of 10 is super concerning, so you could be something like, it's not you, it's your constant manifestations of quiet and the fact that you can't keep a firm grip on reality. That's a way that you can let someone down. Don't make it necessarily about them, make it about you. And that's just something I've learned over a couple of years of dating maybe people who weren't the most stable on the face of the planet. Yeah, the final line is, everyone fears Porthos not because he is devious and evil, but because he's near omnipotent and insane. That's riding an elephant, if ever I heard it. So, yeah.
I think I'm on the same page. I think he makes more sense as sort of an obstacle that you have to navigate. And if I'm not mistaken, isn't there some sense in which Ishak is his successor?
And Ishak being like, Porthos tried to lead from the front, and that didn't work out too well. Maybe I need to be more subtle. And I think that has really good vibes because you're building the world and the story, and you're being like, oh, why not me? And why him? And then Porthos feels spited, but maybe it's someone who he considers to be his equal in some way, so you're able to let him down easily. I like that.
Yeah.
And the last two, and this is quite a pair. Senex. This to me is the sleeper hit. Senex is a several century old Euthanatoi Archmage, about 500, always had a dour demeanor, which is how he got the name Senex, meaning old man. Fast fact, the term senator literally means old man, and I think we should really keep with the Greek suffixes. So Hillary Clinton was a senatrix. And if you wanted to keep something gender neutral, that person would be a senatron, which sounds like some sort of like senatorial robot, which I can also get behind. Befriended Acrides Solonikis of the Cult of Ecstasy and the Fragile Path, has a history going back, member of the Mod Zimbabwe group, where big into the fate side, not so much in the death side, known foe of the technocracy, big teacher, has a lot of students, isn't real flashy, has control over the chantry of Kerberos on Pluto, is trying to investigate while also keeping a lid on what the consanguinity of Eternal Joy has done, and is also kind of an important character in one of the Ascension endings where you're like, why don't you do it, Senex? And Senex goes, I'm too old to do this. You should go do it. Middle-aged black man in good health, speaks a lot of languages. What did you see in the old man?
An old man. I mean, there is a lot to recommend Senex in terms of temperament. He seems nice. He seems really mellow. Definitely like a smart guy with a lot of perspective, good interpersonal style. But at the end of the day, there's a reason you don't call somebody else granddaddy in bed. It's just not sexy. Like, I don't know what to tell you except he's a grandpa. I mean, you can spot him a mile away. When he was a young man, somebody said like, hey, here's your name now. It means grandpa. Like, that's who he is. He would be played by Morgan Freeman. I wouldn't sleep with Morgan Freeman, even if he asked me in the voice of Morgan Freeman. But there could be a scenario in this dating sim where, for example, you're playing an older character or you get aged, where you have a very happy, like, domestic romantic life. Like, I would like to have Senex bring me flowers, I guess, if we're at that stage of the relationship where, like, that's as far as it goes.
Yeah, this strikes me as a relationship that is very cozy. Sometimes they talk about like types of relationships, and one is, I married my best friend. And that's a good thing to hear, but sometimes it lacks passion. And that's what I get from Senex. This is very much a person, they will be with me through thick and thin. But one of the downsides, I don't think there's going to be a lot of passion to it. And it's going to be one of those things where he's so giving and so nice to so many people. How do I know I'm special and he's not just like settling? Because I mean, after 500 years, you kind of want to move on with your life. And I understand that. My other concern is theoretically Archmage of Entropy. One of the problems, he knows how the relationship is going to end. I would be racked with guilt and second guessing myself, like, oh, is he not that into me because he knows how it's going to end up and he's just kind of biding time or something like that? Or alternatively, we had a really big fight. Is he just modifying the strings of fate so that we get along now and it's really about me? I don't see him as being a good pick for someone who's that kind of existentially insecure like I am. But otherwise, yeah, I do like the idea of being like, hey, let's not be ageist. about this. Let's cover the full panoply of thing. On one end, you've got Niall and Dante at the age of like 22 and 27. At the other end, you got Senex, and I think that's a good thing to do there. And it's also something where maybe this is a person that you date, and you learn a lot about yourself in the process. You learn a lot about manners. You learn a lot about listening. In the same way, it's kind of like a training league for eShock. If that's ultimately what you're going to, maybe this is a step on the way to pick up those skills to work with a good listener and kind of develop you before you can develop the relationship. On the flip side, has killed his apprentice possibly twice. So this is a person that can do very hard things. So if this is a person that maybe I needed someone to help me put down an ailing pet or something like that, I could see that as being super useful to be around. So there is some upside to it. Has kept himself in pretty good shape. We don't get the sense that he's using life magics to cheat that, and he's not very flashy with the magics. So he's not going to be attracting Paradox or the Technocrats, and those are both things that I want if I'm going to be dating a 500-year-old Archmage.
That's the thing, though, that last point that you make. I feel like you're getting squeezed out on, like, who wants to date Senex, because here I am in the market for an Archmage. Like, I am at a level where I'm like skipping around Horizon Realms, trying to like take my pick of the NPC cast of this batshit game. I could go back to normal Earth. I could go back to the Mudball and date a normal person. I'm looking for an Archmage. So if we're going to sit around the house all night and drink tea and, talk about what was in the newspaper this morning, because of course he still reads the newspaper, then what am I doing up here? Why did I leave Earth for this? For a grandpa, for somebody who's going to help me with the pets need to be put down? No, I want crazy adventures, and Senex isn't into it. So he may struggle to find his audience. That may be why he's single.
It's one of those things where if you meet your girlfriend at a rock concert, you are now dating someone that you met at a rock concert. There's certain scripts that's going to hew to and certain that it wouldn't, and you shouldn't be surprised if it hews to that script. That's a good observation. Which brings us to our last proper Archmage, not lacking subtlety, Vormos, Grand Harvester of Souls. Vormos is also introduced in the Book of Chantries as the head of the Consanguinity of Eternal Joy, which resides in the House of Helicar, which is a massive walking fortress that used to be in the Shade Realm of Entropy, tied with Pluto, and is now being overseen by Senex, is on a bit of a quest, has realized that he's accumulated a lot of karmic debt over his life, killing a lot of people, wanting to become a god, eventually merged with a lesser aspect of Kali and entered the apex of history to seize the Pasupata Astra, to try and break the cycle of creation and save the Chalorian from untold destruction at the force of entropy. So that's a person with drive, and if you read the book Ascension, may entirely succeed. So again, it's one of those things where, is it arrogance if the person can actually seal the deal? It has two forms, one of an old man who has a cane, which is the spine of a child with a skull on top, and another one is this destructive Shiva god form. Sees death in all things, possibly.
Speaking of arrogance, is he arrogant? Is he not? Jury's out. Would it be arrogant to try to date Vormos? I think it would. I think that by the themes of Mage, if you look at a guy who's trying to replace the Great Wheel and think, but I can change him, then you're headed for a fall. I don't think he wants anything a person can give him. He seems like a real user too, like, because he's got this whole cult and like he's just like monomaniacal. When I think about a way in with him, whatever I do, he's using me. It's instrumental, and that's not a place I want to be in.
This to me is a character that you try and get in with because it would be a marriage of convenience. 10 dots and allies wants to rewrite the rule of creation. This is a person that you would try and date because you understand that the world as we know it is going to be destroyed and you want to be set up in a good position for whatever replaces it. So I kind of see this as one of those possible avenues. Like we almost like a figure where you kind of make your amends with it to try and get in good, and no one feels good about it. And I frankly don't want that in my game. When I think of a lighthearted Archmage dating sim, not something I want to even have in there. It's really not on point for me. Not what I want in my world of darkness. I want the world of darkness in a dating sim to be the darkness of what does my wonderful future with an Archmage look like, not gutter punk.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the scenario in which you go for him, you're maybe trying to use him and trying to achieve something, and he's doing the same. Mm-hmm. Or you get hooked into that in some manner. And so there's not really in any way a nice ending to this story. Like, surprise, dating the Harvester of All Souls, it doesn't end well. The only way I can see it is if there is an in. Here's a guy who does not seem to have that fuse in your brain where you start to go from like idea to idea to idea. And then at a certain point you think, no, wait, at this point I'm so far afield from reality that I have to stop. Like, I think even more than other mages, he does not have that. And so it's possible that you can sort of pull him back from the brink. I mean, here's a guy who, it's not going out on a limb to say that he fears change, but could maybe be shepherded into putting his energies in a different direction. And, you know, he took on one divine aspect. You could maybe get him around to taking on another aspect that would give him a different perspective. It wouldn't be out of the question for somebody who is a master of entropy like this to become a totally different person over the course of years. So what I said earlier stands. I think this is a fool's errand. But if there's an ending of this game where you end up with Vormus and you're happy, I think it is through just a Herculean task of like taking him from point A to point B to point C until he is like appearing to you fused with an aspect of Apollo, deciding that life is great after all, which is maybe not super realistic, but somewhere closer to the ballpark of a dude I'd like to go to bed with.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. You say realistic. We are talking about a World of Darkness Archmage dating sim, so like your mileage may vary. The other weird case where I could see this as being super useful is I think we all have that person that we've done things in our past and we kind of want a new start, and those things in the past may be pursuing us, so maybe you date a cop or something like that because you've done something. And this is like the cosmic version of that, maybe for one of your previous dates, because 9 characters isn't enough to build a game out. Maybe you're super into a Nefandus and you wind up stepping through the calls, and you later come to regret that, and you're like, oh, my soul is going to be destroyed to all time. Is there any way for me to get out of that? Yes, I hitch my wagon to Vormas, Grand Harvester of Souls, who's going to destroy the cycle of creation, and I'm never going to have to pay the bill for the meal I ate. So I could also see this as being a case where you're trying to, you know you're going to hit bottom, but maybe we can get some cushions there when you finally do. It's one of those cases where you shot for an A, you missed, you don't want to fail, but here's maybe your chance of getting a D. Mm-hmm. The downside, you're destroying the cycle of creation and the possibility of change in a universe and dealing with a replaced incarnation of its dark god. So we've gone through the 9. If you were to add like an Archmage to the roster, where do you see being the real big dating holes that we could add, that we could try and fill in? If you were to come up with a couple custom Archmages, what do you think needs to really be added to the lineup?
Well, it's not exactly an Archmage, but I actually have something from the canon for this, because as you mentioned, we got a big sausage fest here, and we're really trending like towards some pretty grisly scenarios. Like, I'm sure there is fun to be had with Medea, but there's something hanging over the proceedings. Mm-hmm. If we want just like, this is the fun one to go out with, if you can kind of like crack that nut, if you can like make the relationship work, I think maybe you go for the matriarch. Because
the fused twin avatars that run Mecca, which is kind of the technocratic prison beyond worlds. Yeah.
So she's putting up a front for sure, right? Like, I mean, it is initially very cold. Like, I mean, she is basically like, yeah, twin spirits inhabiting a prison dimension. But I think that if you can get in there, which I think, you know, she's always looking to enslave people. So you have like, it's not hard to get in the door. Then, you know, you apply all your various magical abilities, your charm, whatever, really figure out the psychology of the matriarch, who, you know, she's a technocrat. She believes in something. And there's always something to talk about, right? Because you live inside her. So I think if you can do that and get your own consciousness somehow added to where she is, then her appearance changes from prison dimension to sexy twins, and we get to have some real hot stuff in this game. And there's a level of fusion here that is both very high concept and extremely erotic, which is, I think, what we want from our Mage dating sim.
Oh, definitely. And also something, yeah. I mean, the hard part is you don't get a lot of dating sims that also allow you to ask deep philosophical questions about the nature of reality. It's really an untapped market. And I think
it's like, is it incest if I am you? So
yeah.
I mean, if I'm being added to the triumvirate, that's cool, and that's an ending for sure. But I'm into it, Ed. So I would add the matriarch, and I think that's a whole scenario. That's like a lot of value.
The one that came up for me is the precepts of Damien are considered to be like the foundational to-do document, like the commandments of being a technocrat. And Saint Damien was this champion New World Order person. I don't see a lot of space in this game for like courtly romance. So I like the idea of introducing a character where, no, you have to cross your T's and dot your I's. There's going to be some smoldering. You're going to romance each other largely via memo, and I think that's underdone. Like, it's one of those things where you're going to have text and you're going to have subtext, and it's going to be really hard to pick it up. And of characters where you can try and get some action on the down low, I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be one of those things where John Waters, noted film director and dating advice advocate, said that on your first date, you should always commit a small crime. And I think St. Damien is going to be able to lean into that. You're probably going to go up 1 or 2 degrees in the technocracy, and that's going to make it exciting. It gets the adrenaline going. We've got you got your dopamine receptors firing. Once that happens, sparks are just going to fly, and there's going to be a hell of a buildup. Same way, Tychoides, one of the Celestial Masters, founder of the modern Void Engineers, seems like a very practical person, is driven to explore the void and outer space, and maybe you can be the person who says, hey, Tychoides, now it's time to explore some inner space. I've got some things that I want to show you. And that could be a real thing where you really open up an Archmage's eyes to things. So yeah, I think there's a lot of options. Yeah, it is a lot of white guys, and we really need to work on that. So listeners, if you have any recommendations for Archmages that you would like to see added to our game, which is obviously going to come out in like 2023, we're just waiting for White Wolf to contact us. But when they do, we look forward to doing a design diary on that. And those are some really interesting angles. Do you have any other thoughts on Archmage dating or things that you'd might like to see in a game?
Just to say that, like, this is a crazy idea, but honestly, we are always in search of a way to play Mage that works. Like, it's one thing to understand the system and understand what is going on in this world, but it's another thing to, like, get actual human beings at the table having fun doing what this game can do. And honestly, I don't think this is the worst idea I've ever heard for it.
I certainly appreciate it. Kris, if people are interested in your show and what you're doing, where can they get more information?
So MegaDumbCast, we've already talked about. That is the main show. There's also a series on my Patreon, which may be of interest to World of Darkness fans. A World of Dumbness, Mary Slay. I don't know if I can say the name of that series on your show, but I guess you'll bleep it if I can't. It is a series where we are going through every clan book for the vampire clans, and we are discussing whether we would fuck, marry, or slay a member of each of those clans. That is me and the wonderful Claire Mulcairn. If you're interested in that, if you're interested in the main show or anything else that I do, then I am MegaDumbCast everywhere. I am MegaDumbCast on Patreon. That is patreon.com/MegaDumbCast. I am MegaDumbCast on Twitter. You can find me on Podbean or your favorite podcatcher. Just search for MegaDumbCast. You can see if you like me immediately. As you listen to this, there is a 6 out of 7 chance that I released a podcast episode today. So go listen. It's a short episode, and see if you like me, or if you if you want to reject me, like, that's fine too. But maybe don't tweet me about it.
Yeah, remarkably apropos considering what we're talking about. We look forward to having you on sometime in the indeterminate future. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you so much. This was a ton of fun.
Thank you for listening to Mates the Podcast. If you super liked this episode or super didn't, drop us a line at matesthepodcast@gmail.com or at matesthepodcast on Twitter. We have a Hop in Discord community at discord.me/matesthepodcast. If you'd like to support us and get a cool chat color in Discord, as well as whatever other benefits I decide to make up on the fly, go to matesthepodcast.com and click on Become a Supporter of Mates the Podcast. If you'd like to subscribe, you can do so on Spotify, Anchor, TuneIn, iTunes, Google Play Podcasts, or the podcatcher of your choice. If you like us, give us a review on the platform of your choosing, and maybe tell a friend about it. I don't know. You do you. Also, go to Mates the Podcast for show notes and all of our previous shows. And with that, go change reality.